Begin the Gemara today on Daf Tezvav Amud Beis, 10 lines from the bottom of the page where it says, Boy Ilfe. The Gemara before brought halachas when you are combining two different things that Chachamim instituted and trying to use them both together. Whether regarding verifying the kashrus of a get, using the usual verification that's by all status, and combining that with the special takanas Chachamim for a get, which is the shliach that tells us b'fanei nichta b'fanei nechtam. Or the Gemara brought a halacha regarding a Reshus HaYachid, using the wall for the Reshus HaYachid. Half is a wall and half is the embankment of the ground that creates the height of 10 tvachim. The Gemara says you can't combine these two things. It has to be one or the other. Similarly, the Gemara here is going to discuss a halacha regarding washing your hands, netilas yadayim for bread. Boy, Ilfe, so Ilfe asked the Shaila, Yadayim tahayris lachatzayin, washing your hands, netilas yadayim. Will it be tired if you wash it halfway, or aim tahayris lachatzayin? Or it will not be tired if you're washing it halfway? Now it's not clear what the Gemara means, what Ilfe means to ask by this question. Halfway, what's this halfway? So the Gemara tries a few options here. Hey Chidami, what was his Shaila? If his Shaila was the kamashu beitrei miravius, the half that means regarding the water, not regarding the hands, that there was just a revius of water, which is the minimum amount of water needed in order to wash your hands, and two people are washing their hands from this one revius, and that's what means half. That two are using, that it becomes, the water becomes split in half for both of these people. Says the Gemara, what's the Shaila? There's a clear Mishnah about this. Vatnan, the Mishnah says, miravius, if you have a revius of water, noitlin liyadayim le'echad, that's the amount of water that could be used for one person, va'afilu l'shnayim, and it could even be used for two people. So the Mishnah clearly says that one revius could be used for two people. So Rashi over here, there's a machlekes Rishonim about this. The Alter Rebbe actually in Shulchan Aruch brings both two opinions about this. One opinion is that if you have that one revius, you can wash one person's hands, and then afterwards you can wash, if there's leftovers, you can wash another person's hands from that same revius. But there's another opinion that when this Mishnah says two people can wash from the same revius, what it means is that both people place their hands under this water. When you're pouring the water, it goes on both people's hands at the same time. It can't be one after the other. Obviously, this halacha of revius only applies when the water is going to cover enough of the person's hand that the revius is not a lot of water, but it's going to have to be a small hand that will be able to cover the entire hands. But the point is, one revius could be used for two people if they're washing at the same time or one right after the other. So that can't be the Shaila of Ilfa. Ve'ela, says the Gemara, rather, what was the Shaila? The Kamashi chada yode is the Shaila of Ilfa when each hand is washed separately. He washes one hand and then he washes the other hand. And that was the Shaila of Ilfa. Can that be a good netilas yadayim? Now, in the simple pshat of the Gemara, what the Gemara is saying is that Ilfa is asking, maybe when you wash your hands for netilas yadayim, you must wash both of your hands at the same time, which would basically mean someone else has to wash your hands in order to wash both of your hands at the same time. Or could you wash like we do today, one and then the other? That's the simple pshat of the Gemara here. But some say that that's not what the Gemara means, because it's obvious that you can wash your hands one after the other. But what the Gemara means to say is a person washes one hand and he dries that one hand, and after he dries that one hand, then he washes the second hand. Maybe that was the Shaila of Ilfa when it's like sort of separated, the two hands that are being washed. Says the Gemara, this itself, this as well is not a Shaila, because we can learn this from what it says in the Mishnah, or really it's a Braisa. V'hatnan or v'hatanya hanoitel yadav, a person that's washing his hands, netilas yadayim for bread, achas benetila. One hand he washes from properly, like when you wash, pouring from a kvart on the hand, and v'achas b'shtifa. And another hand he's toiveling, he puts it into water, into a mikveh, whatever it is, into a stream, to be able to toivel his hand like that without pouring it on his hands. So Yadav Tahiris, his hands are both going to be pure. You don't have to wash both of the hands. One can be washed and one can be tabled in a stream. So if you can wash and table one in the stream, for sure you can wash both of the hands separately. So Ve'ela, says the Gemara, what must have been Ilfis Shaila, the Kamashi Palge the Yode, that he's washing half of a hand at a time. Washes half of the hand, and then he washes another half of the hand, not together. Only after one half dries, then he washes the other half of his hand. Fragt the Gemara, but could that even be a shaila? It was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai that Yadayim ain tahiris lachatzayin. You cannot wash half of the hand and then another half of the hand. So it's clear. Answers the Gemara, lo tzriche. The only time when Ilfa had the question is the ikke mashke tefeyach. That he washes one half of the hand and then he washes the other half. But when he comes to wash the second half, the first half is not wiped off. There's still moisture from the hand, from the water that was there before on the first half of the hand. That's a shaila. Says the Gemara, but that should not be enough. Because if there's still moisture of water remaining from when he washed the first half of his hand, that should not be enough to connect the other half of the hand that he washes. And the Gemara brings the Mishnah for this, regarding this concept where you have mashke tefeyach, that it will not connect to other waters. Because Vatanan, we learned in the Mishnah that says as follows. Hanitzuk, when you have a stream of water that's pouring, you have one keli and you have another keli, and there's a stream of water that's flowing from the top keli to the bottom keli. That's a nitzuk. Or v'haketafris. Ketafris is when you have a very steep surface and there's water that is flowing from the top to the bottom in this very steep slope. Umashke tefeyach. So by this ketafris, there's moisture of water on this steep slope between water that's above and water that's below. Einoi chibur. This is not considered to be a connection. There won't be any connection here because of the nitzuk or the ketafris. Loyle tumah v'loyle tara. Not for the halachas of tumah and not for the halachas of tara. So Rashi explains the halachas of tumah would be if you have water that's flowing from one keli to another, and the bottom keli is tameh. So you may think because there's a flow of water between them, so therefore it creates a connection and it becomes tameh. It does not create that connection, it does not create any tumah. The same thing also with a katafris, when you have this very steep slope between two kelim, and one is tameh and one is tahir, it does not create a connection to make the other tameh. Now, b'negei to tara as well, the Braisa here says that there's no connection. Rashi's pshat on this is regarding a mikveh. The mikveh, the minimum size of a mikveh has to be 40 saw. What's if you have a mikveh that's missing some water of 40 saw? But there is a katafris, there is this slope that connects to other waters that are not far. So maybe you could connect that water to this water of 40 saw, that it should become like one large mikveh, and it has the right amount of 40 saw. So the Mishnah is saying, no, that katafris that has mashke tefeyach, it has in it water that's moist, that connects the two pools of water, does not become a connection, even though there's sort of moisture of water that's connecting them. It doesn't matter. The mikveh is still not a kosher mikveh.
We say by all that two people, somebody toilet in the mikveh and he's standing, and as long as his feet are in the.
Okay, that's coming soon. We'll have that's coming soon in the Gemara. Let's wait, but it's coming right over here soon in the Gemara. This is Rashi's prat b'negei to the mikveh tara. You see here, there's a very, very long taisus on the Amud. Taisus has a different pshat. Taisus says it's speaking about a halacha of hashokeh. Yeah. One of the ways of being, there's different halachas of hashokeh. Here, the halacha of hashokeh, Taisus says, the Mishnah here speaking about is when you have fluids that are tamei, one of the ways of being metired it is if it touches a mikveh, that fluids, that liquids become tire. So over here, it's speaking about liquids that was tamei, and you want to be metired it. It's not touching the mikveh directly. It's touching the mikveh through this katafris, this slope that there's moisture in between that sort of connects them. So the Mishnah is saying that that's not considered to be a connection. Mashke teifeyach, just because there's some moisture that connects it, it's not enough to connect it. So what's the Gemara's question? Over here, a person that washes half of his hand. Then he waits, and then he washes the other half of his hand. Even if the first half of his hand is still a bit moist, it's not enough to say that it's considered that he washed the whole hand at the same time, because the moisture that's left over does not create a connection to the other water that he washes the other half of his hand. So what was Ilfa's shaila? Says the Gemara, the case over here is different. Over here, this is moist enough that if something else will touch it, it'll become moist enough that will cause moisture to something else. So it's not just a bit moist. It's the moisture is there's more water over here. So in such a case, if a person washes half of his hands and it's tefeyach lehatfiyach, then I could say that the other half of his hand will connect to the first half that he washed. Fragt the Gemara, but this Ilfa shouldn't have a shaila about this either, because Honami Tanina. This is something that we learned clearly in a Braisa. Tefeyach lehatfiyach. If something is moist enough that it causes something else to become also that moist, so then chibur, that is considered to be a connection. So when we said before that the katafris is not a connection between two mikvahs or when you get to mashkin to connect it, that's only if it's a bit teifeach. But if it's teifeach la'atfiach, that it causes something else to become as moist as this, that it could also add moisture to something else, so then it is a connection. So it's a clear braisa. Says the Gemara, the reason why the Ilfa has the shaila regarding netilas yadayim is because dilme le'inyim mikvois. Because maybe I would say that this halacha, that it is considered to be a chibur, is only regarding mikvois. Rabbi Yehudahi, and this is based on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. What does it say regarding mikvois? So here the Gemara brings the case that you just brought up before. The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, mikveh sheyesh ba'aboim sa mechuvanis. If you have a mikveh that has exactly the amount needed, the water, 40 sa. V'yard shnayim v'tovlu. And two people went down to table in this mikveh. So we skipped the parentheses here. And they went down to table b'zeh achazeh, one following the other. So Risha in Tahir, the first one entered into a mikveh that has the 40 saw, so it's Tahir. V'hasheni tameh, but the second person will be tameh because the first one, when he leaves the mikveh, he takes some water with him, and the mikveh doesn't have the amount of water needed. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the first person that taivled is still standing and his feet are still touching the water, then afasheni tahir. Then the second person will also be tahir. What's the reason for this? So Rashi actually says that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is based on the halacha l'Moshe Sinai that's called good achis, which means that the water that's in the body on this person is considered to be as if it's inside the mikveh. Good achas means as if it's below, as if the water that's on his body, because his feet are still in the water, as if it's part of the mikveh, and the second person inside the mikveh is taiveling in a mikveh of 40 sa. But there would be a svara to say that this halacha, that there's a connection here, is based only on good achis, but otherwise, when a person is washing his hands, and part of his hands is still wet, and then he wants to wash the other half of his hands, not necessarily is that going to be considered a connection. Maybe the connection that it said before regarding the katafris, when it's tefeach, amanas latfiach, is only based on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, based on the rule of good achis. But by netilas yadayim, I wouldn't apply that halacha. That's why Ilfa had a shaila, when you wash half of your hand, and you wash the other half, and the first half is moist, could you connect the two halves for netilas yadayim? That was Ilfa's shaila. I don't think the idea of good achas applies over here. Good achas applies when you have a shear of a mikveh, and you have to have the full amount of the shear of a mikveh. It's not over here. There's a halacha that it has to be bevas achas. Regarding bevas achas, there's no halacha of good achas. When you get to the presence of the water inside the mikveh, there you say that even though it's on his body, it's as if it's below inside the mikveh. Okay, so the Gemara does not. Second, let's continue inside over here. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah starts a new thing, but this is the end of the Gemara explaining regarding the Netilas Yadayim. This was Ilfa's Shaila. Okay, so basically the Shaila of Ilfa was, again, a similar concept to what we learned before, combining the two halves of the hand, that it should be a proper Netilas Yadayim. Now, similar Shaila, Rabbi Yirmiyah also asks regarding another halacha. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Harei Amru, we know that the Chachamim said, Haba Roshei v'Rubai b'mayim shuvim. A person that tovels with most of his body into drawn water. In other words, not mikveh waters, but drawn water, which is possible for a mikveh. So what's that's one case. And another case, v'tahir, a person that was pure. Shenaflu al Roshei v'al Rubai shloisha lugim mayim shuvim. That he took a shower or he fell upon his body 3 lugim of drawn water, of tamei, of not kosher mikveh waters. Okay, not kosher for a mikveh. That's what mayim shuvim are. Right, so tamei. In both of these cases, Chachamim instituted that a person becomes tamei. This is a Gemara in the first Perek of Shabbos, where the Gemara says that in times of the Gemara, they made a gzeira that if you go into mayim shuvim, you become tamei. The reason for this was because in those times the mikveh were very, very dirty. So then after they came out of the mikveh, they would go and take a shower or wash themselves off with clean water. Came to a point where people began saying, oh, it's not the mikveh that's making me pure, it's the mayim shuvim, it's the shower or the clean waters afterwards that are making me pure. So Chacham will geyser that if you go into that clean waters or you take a shower afterwards, then no, that makes you tamei. Okay, so and
People
Chachamim,
do it.
correct. Okay, but this was the Gzeira. No, it's not a Shaila. No. So this was the Gzeira that the Gemara made then. And the Gzeira was two things. First, they made a Gzeira regarding someone that toivels in Mayim Shuvim, and then they added to this Gzeira and even more and said that even someone that just takes a shower from these Mayim Shuvim. Because one without the other, Rashi says this Gzeira wouldn't hold. So those were the two Gzeiras that they made. Toivel in Mayim Shuvim and taking a shower of these Mayim Shuvim that make the person Tomei. Okay, now, the reason why today this doesn't apply is because, as Rashi says, this was only a Gzeira regarding not being allowed to eat Truma. For a kohen to be tired to eat truma, but b'chlal today we don't have the truma, so today taking a shower after the mikveh. I'm not saying whether you should or shouldn't take a shower after the mikveh, but I'm just saying the gzeira is bisman of achilas truma. That's what it applies to.
So until she done for bread, lechem.
Which could be. That's a different thing. The Tilas Yadayim is not connected to truma. It originally was for truma, correct? Yeah. So now on this, boy Rab Yirmiyah asks the shaila chetziyai b'piyah. So now there were two different gzeiras here. One was not to go into Mayim Shuvim, and one was not to have the water of Mayim Shuvim poured on you. What if half of his body is in Mayim Shuvim, b'chetziyai b'nefila, and half of his body has the Mayim Shuvim poured upon him, a shower? What does the gzeira apply then if you combine these two together that he should become tummy from eating truma? So the Gemara doesn't answer this. So this is here another takeout. This remains unresolved. So this is another example where you have two gzeiras of chachamim and you combine them both together, and it's a shaila whether this would cause tumah for the person. Another shaila the Gemara asks, Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, Harei Amru. Chachamim said, Balkari chayla. Al-Balkari, which is not well. So the halacha of a Balkari, Rashi here brings that there's two halachas of a Balkari. There's the halacha of a Balkari min ha-Torah. A Balkari becomes tomei, and he's not allowed to enter into the Beis HaMikdash without properly toiveling in a mikveh. But here, the Gemara is not talking about that halacha min ha-Torah. It's talking about the halacha midrabanan, which is actually called Tvilas Ezra. Ezra was misakin that you can't learn Torah unless you go to the mikveh after a person sees seminal emission, which is what a Balkari is. So now this takana of Ezra, Hare Amru Balkari Chayla, they said a leniency for a Balkari that became sick, Shenasnu all of Tisha Kabim Mayim, that it's hard for him to go into a mikveh. So even if they just poured on him 9 kavim of water, tahir, he becomes tahir to learn Torah. Okay, that was a takana of the Chachamim regarding a Balkari to be allowed to learn Torah. So on this, boy Rav Papa asked the Shaila, Chatziyai b'tvila. So this person, how about if he halfway toiveled, and v'chatziyai b'nesina, and on the other half of his body, they poured water on him? Will this be mitayir him or not? So usually the Balkari, either he goes to the mikveh, or you have to pour 9 kavim of water upon him to be mitayir him. But if it was half and half, could you combine these two to be mitayir him? Teiku, this also remains unresolved. It's interesting thing here because it says in the Rishayim that a second ago we just said that Mayim Shuvim causes a person to become tummy. And right here it's saying regarding this Balkari that Chachamim were makel that he could learn Torah by just pouring upon him these same Mayim Shuvim that would make him tummy. So the answer, the Ritva here says, the answer is true. These Mayim Shuvim for Truma will make him tummy. But for Limudat Torah, for this Tvilas Ezra, for Limudat Torah, it'll make him tahir. Interesting. Okay, but I mean this takana of Ezra, as it's brought in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, we're not necessarily mekayim bisman hazeh. I mean there is an Indian of Tvilas Ezra to be machmir Tvilas Ezra, but we don't. This takana of Ezra did not hold. It's not halacha. That's a chiyuv bisman hazeh. Okay, we come back now to the halachas of get. Going back to what it said in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah it said, the shliach that's delivering the get from Medina Sayyam, and he has to testify that the get is kosher, and he has to say two things, b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam, that it was signed, it was written and signed in his presence. Okay, so before we learn the Gemara inside, let me just remind you what we learned in the first Peirik, because this is going to be very relevant for the next Amud here. The machlokes between Rabba and Rava, what's the purpose of testifying about this get? Rabba says the purpose is to testify that the get was written l'shma. There's a concern that the get and chutz la'aretz people don't know the halacha, or even if they do know the halacha, still there's a concern that the husband may come and be ma'arer and challenge to say that this get was written shalei l'shma. So you have to verify that. According to Rava, it's not about the lishma of the get, it's about the authenticity of the signatures, the chesimis. We have to be mekayim to know that the signatures were not forged and it's proper signatures. Lekayim, to be mekayim the get. Those are the two reasons to why you have to come and testify about a get that's coming from Medina Sayyam. One more point that we had before in the first Perek that's relevant for the next Gemara here. The Gemara explains that it's necessary to make a distinction between the halacha of a get and other shtaris. By a regular shtar, if you want to be mekayim a shtar, you have to have two edim to validate the kashrus of a shtar. Here, there's a special kula because of an aguna. We don't want this woman to be stuck, chacham or mekel, that you can trust one shliach to testify for the kashrus of the signature. In order not to confuse a get with a regular shtar, Chachamim instituted that it's not enough just to validate the signatures, the way you validate every shtar, but you have to also say edus on the whole writing of the get, so that it should be clear that it's different than a regular shtar. By a regular shtar, the edim don't testify about the whole writing of the shtar, they just validate the signatures. Here you have to say edus on the whole shtar, on the whole get that is, together with the signatures. That's what the Gemara referred to before as lo'leisi la'achlufi. We don't want a shtar to be confused with the halacha of a get. Okay, now let's see what the Gemara says here. So in the Mishnah it said, Echod oime b'fanei nichtav. You have one person that comes and testifies about this get that it was written in front of him. Ve'echod oime, and the Mishnah continues, it says, and the other one comes and testifies b'fanei nichtav, that the get was signed in front of him. So the Mishnah said that it'll be puzzle. Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Rav Yechanan. So Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said in the name of Rav Yechanan about this Mishnah. Lo Shanu, the halach of the Mishnah was only said, Ela she'eina get yotze mitachas yidei shneim. This is only because these two people that are testifying about this get, they're not both shluchim that were appointed to bring this get. One is a shliach, and the other is just another person that comes along with him, and he's testifying as well. But they're not both shluchim. But if they were both appointed as shluchim to bring this get, then kosher. Then, even if one testifies b'fanei nichtav and the other testifies b'fanei nechtam, it's going to be kosher. Why is it going to be kosher? I think the problem over here is, didn't Chachamim institute that one shliach must testify both? He must testify that it was signed and written in front of him. And as I mentioned before, the reason is because we don't want a get to be confused with any other shtar, so therefore you must testify on both the writing and the signing. So why over here should it be kosher? Says the Gemara, Alma Kasavar, I see that Rabbi Yechanan holds, Shnayim sheviu get me Medina Sayyam. When it's two shluchim that are delivering a get from Medina Sayyam, it's not necessary to testify that the get is kosher. And we had this before in the Gemara, when two shluchim deliver a get. So if you follow Rava's opinion, Rava says that the main thing is that you have to have available edim to testify about the validity of the signatures. If there are two shluchim that are delivering the get, so you have them. You have two shluchim that are here available to validate the get. So if there are two shluchim, then it's fine. So therefore, what Rashi explains is, it's not necessary for these two shluchim to say any edus. The b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam is totally not necessary. So if one is going to testify b'fanei nichtav and the other testifies b'fanei nechtam, and it's not a proper edus, but it's extra. You don't even need them b'chlal to testify this. Again? Just being here, just two shluchim is fine. Now there's another important point that Rashi says over here. You may ask, so if the point here is that I have two edim available that are coming along with this get, what difference does it make if they're both shluchim, or if one is a shliach and one is not a shliach? Either way, the fact is you have two people available to validate this get, and that should be enough. Says Rashi, loy plug. When there's one shliach, then Chachamim institute that you must testify about the kashrus of the get. If there's two shluchim, then Chachamim said you have two shluchim available here, then you don't testify. That's the pshat in Rashi over here. Okay, but this is all based, as we'll see soon, the Gemara will spell it out. This is all based on Rava's opinion that we have to validate the signatures. So once you have two shluchim here, we have them available to validate the signatures, and there's no need to testify anything. Amalei Abaye, now Abaye says, well, there's another girsi in the Gemara, Amalei Rav Asi, so he asked about this, Ela Meyata, so if so, Sefer Diktani. What's the next case that it says in the Mishnah? In the next case, there's an argument here. Shnayim Oimrim, b'fanei nichtav. If you have two that are saying that the get was written in front of them, and ve'echad oime b'fanei nechtam, and one is saying that the get was signed in front of him, so pasul. So the Tanakama, the Mishnah says that the get will still be pasul. And Rabbi Yehuda machshe, And Rabbi Yehuda argues, and Rabbi Yehuda says that the get will be kosher. So according to your explanation of our Mishnah, that we're not speaking about a case where two are shluchim, only one is a shliach. So I would have to say regarding this case as well that it's the same thing. The reason over here, in this case, that this is an argument. Why is the Tana Kama saying that the get is possible? The Eina get Yaitzim mitachas yidei shneim, because there's no two shluchim here. But how get Yaitzim mitachas yidei shneim? If they were both shluchim, machshiri rabbanon, then even the Tana Kama would say that the get is kosher. That's what it seems. So Amalei, so he answered Rabbi or Ravasi, yeah, this is correct. The entire Mishnah is speaking about a case where only one of them is a shliach. This case over here as well, when it says that two are testifying that the get was written in front of them, those two are not shluchim. If they would be shluchim, so then the get would, you wouldn't even need any testimony at all. Says the Gemara, so if so, v'chi ein get yoytze mitachas yidei shneim, if you don't have the get that's being brought by two shluchim, just by one, b'mai pligi. So then what is the argument here? What the Gemara is really asking is, why would Rabbi Yehuda in such a case say that it's kosher? Rabbi Yehuda says that you have just one shliach that's bringing the get, and only two are saying b'fanei nichtav, and one is saying b'fanei nechtam. But there's only one shliach. If there's one shliach, the halacha always is that the one shliach, he must testify both b'fanei nichtav and b'fanei nechtam. But over here, that the one shliach is not testifying both. So why would Rabbi Yehuda say that it would be kosher? And says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda says as follows. The Gemara explains here the machlekes, and this goes back to the point that I said before, that Chachamim instituted that the way you're mekayim a get has to be different than the way you're mekayim a regular shtar, in order not to confuse the two. But the question is, what is enough to make that distinction between a get and a regular shtar? Mar Sovar. So the Tana Kama says, Gazrinon, there's a gzeire, Dilma Asya lechlufi b'kiyim shtaris dalma. We don't want the way a get is going to be verified to be confused with the halacha of a shtar. And be'edechot, we may think that just like a get, you can trust one shliach, that so too by every shtar, you can trust one shliach. In order not to confuse the two, the shliach himself that's bringing the get, he must testify both. B'fanei nichtav and b'fanei nechtam. That makes it clear that it's different than a regular shtar. Mar Sovar, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, like Gazrinon, there's no gzeira in this case. Why is there no gzeira in this case? Even though the shliach himself is not testifying both b'fanei nichtav and b'fanei nechtam, but as long as there's somebody else that's testifying b'fanei nichtav, that's enough of a distinction from a regular shtar. By a regular shtar, there's nobody that's testifying about the writing of the shtar. So you don't need the shliach himself to testify about the writing of the shtar, as long as there's somebody else here testifying about the writing of the shtar. So therefore, we won't confuse this with any other shtar, and therefore that's good enough. That's the explanation of the machlekes. Okay, this is all one version here in the Pshat of our Mishnah. So again, the point of the first version is the Mishnah is dafke speaking about a case where there are no two shluchim. If there were two shluchim, then this whole halacha of testifying b'fanei nichtav b'fanei nechtam would not apply. But now lishna chirina amri la, there was another version of this. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yechanan, afil a get yaitze mitachas yidei shneim. Even if there are two shluchim that are delivering this get, puzzle, and you have one that testified b'fanei nichtav and the other testified b'fanei nechtam, the get will still be puzzle. Says the Gemara, according to this version, Alma Kasavar. So I see that Rabbi Yechanan held Shnayim sheviu get mi Medinas Hayam. Even two that bring a get from overseas to Eretz Yisrael. Tzrichin sheyayimru b'fanei nichtav b'fanei nechtam. They do have to testify that the get was written and signed in front of them. All right, so this is seemingly following Rabba's opinion. Rabba says that even when two bring a get, it doesn't matter. It's not, you can't rely on the two that are present. You still have to testify that the get is kosher, that it was written l'shma. Oh, Malay Abayis, and now the Gemara goes through the same discussion to explain the next part of the Mishnah, to explain the machlekes of the Tana Kama and Rabbi Yehuda according to this version, that both are shluchim that are bringing the get. So Amalei Abaye Elameyativ. So the next case of the Mishnah is Seif Diktani. What does it say in the next case of the Mishnah? Shnai Yemayim B'Fanei Nichtav Echadayim B'Fanei Nechtam. Two are testifying that it was written, and one is testifying that it was signed. Puzzle. So the Tana Kama says it's puzzle. But Rabbi Yehuda Machsher. And Rabbi Yehuda says that the get will be kosher. So what is this talking about? The same as the previous case of the Mishnah. Afil get yaitze mitachas yidei shneim. Even if we have over here two shluchim. Pasli rabbanon, but still the Tana Kama says it'll be puzzle. Is that the case? That's what he was asking. Amalei. So he answered in, yeah. The whole Mishnah, in this case as well, is speaking about when both are shluchim. Says the Gemara, b'mai, if so, b'mai kamiflagi. What is the basis of the argument here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda? If both are shluchim, so in this case, why are they arguing? If it's required to say b'fanai nichtav, b'fanai nechtam, even when they're both shluchim, why would Rabbi Yehuda say that if the shliach that said b'fanai nichtav did not say b'fanai nechtam, why would Rabbi Yehuda say that it's kosher? Okay, now the Gemara here will give a different answer than it gave in the first version. And Taisvis and the Rishonim discuss why does the Gemara not give the same explanation as it does in the first version. Okay, we'll leave that out for now. But it seemingly the Gemara could have gave the same answer, but there's a different answer here. It says the Gemara on Malay. The answer is so. B'mai kamiflagi, that is, sorry, that's where I'm holding. B'mai, what's the argument? Answers the Gemara. Mar sovar lefi she'ein b'kiyin l'shma. So the Tanakama says when you testify for a get, the main point is that you have to testify that the get was written l'shma. So even if you have two shluchim here that are testifying, you must testify that the get was written l'shma, and therefore you have to testify both b'fanai nichtav and b'fanai nichtam. You can't have one testify b'fanai nichtav and the other testifying b'fanai nichtam. So therefore the Tanakama says it's possible. Rabbi Yehuda says that the testimony for the kashrus of the get is not for the lishma. It's just to verify the signatures. And if the main thing is just to verify the signatures, so really you don't have to say anything. You really don't have to testify at all. Once you have two shluchim here, so we have the two shluchim available to verify the signatures. So no testimony is needed. So therefore it doesn't matter that one testify this and the other testify that. No edus is needed at all. That's the explanation. Says the Gemara, if so, leme, shall we say, the Rabbe, v'Rave, the argument of Rabbe and Rave that was brought in the beginning of the Masechta, what the reason for testifying b'fanai nichtav, b'fanai nechtam, is it for lishma? That was Rabbe's opinion. Or is it to verify the signatures, which is Rave's opinion? Tanoi. So right over here, this is the machlekes of the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Rave mitaretz, Rave will answer you and say that both opinions in the Mishnah can follow his opinion, and Rave will answer you, Kilish Nekame. My opinion follows the first version that we brought before. What was the first version? If there's two shluchim, there's no need to testify anything, because we have the two shluchim available to verify the signatures. This Mishnah is speaking about a case where they're not both shluchim. Only one of them is a shliach. If only one of them is a shliach, so then we have already what it explained in the first version. Rava will agree that you have to testify b'fanai nichtav, b'fanai nachtam. The only question is about the issue of not confusing other shtaris with a get. And therefore, do you need the shliach himself to testify both b'fanai nichtav or b'fanai nachtam, or it's enough that someone else testifies b'fanai nichtav? Like the first version, that first version follows with Rava's opinion. Rabba Malach, Rabba will go according to the second version here, which says that when two shluchim deliver a get, that I say that nevertheless you still have to testify that the get is kosher, that it was written lishma, the kula alme bein lishma. Everybody agrees that the main point for testifying for this get is to say that the get was written lishma. What is our Mishnah talking about? Why is there an argument when two shluchim deliver a get, whether you have to testify or not? It's talking about la'acha shalomdu. After people learned the halacha of lishma. This is something that the Gemara brought already in the first Pedic. If you remember, the Gemara said that originally Chachamim instituted this takana because people didn't know the halacha of lishma. But then in the time of the Mishnayos, when the Mishnayos was written, it was already la'acha shalom. The people learned the halacha. So the Gemara now explains, if people know the halacha, so then why do you have to testify at all? So, because then Chachamim made a gzeira, Shema yachzer hadavar lekulkuloi kamiflagi. There's an argument over here that Chachamim then decreed that still keep the takana in place because matters may revert back to the way it was, that people won't know the halacha. So that's what the argument over here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is. The Mar Sovar, the Tanakama says, Gazrinon, we apply this gzeira even when two shluchim are bringing a get. And Omar Sava, Rabbi Yehuda says, like Gazrinon, we're not going to be geyser in this case. So the reason for the machlekes here is, as Rashi explains, two shluchim delivering a get is a milsa deloi shchiche. It's not common. The Gemara already explains this in the first Pedic. Because it's a milsa deloi shchiche, the argument is, do chachamim apply their gzeira even in a case where it's not shchiach? Tanakama says yes, and Rabbi Yehuda says no. So the machlekes over here is regarding this gzeira of Shema Yachzer Hadava Lekulkuloi. do I apply that gzeira when there's two shluchim, because it's not something which is common? Frag the Gemara, according to this pshat, if so, the liflik nami Rabbi Yehuda bereisha. If the case over here is that there are two shluchim that are delivering a get, and the argument is whether the takana applies by two shluchim, so why would Rabbi Yehuda not argue in the previous case? Bereisha, what was the previous case? The case before is that also two shluchim, one is saying b'fanei nichtav, and one is saying b'fanei nechtam. So Rabbi Yehuda in that case should also argue that it's not necessary to say anything. In the Mishnah, it seems like Rabbi Yehuda is only arguing on the next case, where you have three. Two are saying b'fanei nichtav, and one is saying b'fanei nechtam. Why is he not arguing in the previous case? Says the Gemara, he is. Ha'itmer Allah. We learned on the pshat of our Mishnah. Amar Ula said, Cholak Rabbi Yehuda af perishaina. Rabbi Yehuda argued on both cases. As when you have two shluchim, do you still have to testify that the get is kosher, that the kasher is the lishma of the get? So Rav Aishia asked on what Ula just said. It says in the Brayse as follows: Rabbi Yehuda machsher bezu v'loy ba'acheres. Rabbi Yehuda only in this case says it would be kosher, but not in another case. What exactly is this Brayse saying? My love l'mu'ute. Don't you think that this is excluding the reisha of the Mishnah where it says echad oyme b'fanei nichtav ve'echad oyme b'fanei nichtam? When you have two shluchim and one is testifying b'fanei nichtav, the other is testifying b'fanei nichtam, that in that case Rabbi Yehuda says that it will not be kosher, even though you have two shluchim. So this is not like the pshat that we just said. We just said that Rabbi Yehuda argues and says in this case as well that it would be kosher. Says the Gemara loy. That's not what this brayse means. Rather, l'mu'ute b'fanei nechtam avoloi b'fanei nechtav. It's coming to exclude a case where the shliach, you have two shluchim, and one is testifying b'fanei nechtam, and he's not testifying b'fanei nechtav at all. He's not testifying b'chlal about the ksiva of the get. Over here, in this case, it's coming to say that Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it's possible. Now, why would I think it's kosher? He's not testifying b'fanei nechtav. Why should it be kosher? Says the Gemara, I would think to say, once you have two shluchim, which is not usual. So in such a case, Rabbi Yehuda says, we're not geiza anymore, that you have to say the edus for the lishma, you're not geiza shema yachza davar lekulkuloi, because it's an uncommon case. So Dilme, I would think that maybe Asila Chlufi Bikiyim Shtar is the Alma Be'eit Echad Nami Legazar. So maybe I see that Rabbi Yehuda was lenient with the Gzeidis here. So maybe even in a case where it's just one Shliach, in the case where it's one Shliach that's just testifying B'fanei Nechtam, and he's not testifying B'fanei Nichtav at all. So the validity of the signatures you have, and the Lishma, we know it's Lishma because it's Acha Shalomdu. The only gzeira that there could be over here is that people are going to confuse the halacha of a get with other shtaris. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda was lenient regarding this gzeira as well, and he's not geizer this gzeira. So therefore, acha shalomdu, if you testify b'fanei nichtam, maybe that would be good enough. Kamash malon, that's what the Brayse was saying, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you still must testify b'fanei nichtav and b'fanei nechtam, that it shouldn't be confused with other shtaris. Itmer nami, we learned in the Brayse as well, Omer Rabbi Yehuda said, Shnayim sheviu get from Medina Sayam. If you have two shluchim that deliver a get from Medina Sayam, do you have to say b'fanei nichtav or not? Banu l'machloikis Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. This is the argument of Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. So we see right over here that the second version that the Gemara brought here, that the machlokes in the Mishnah is regarding a case where you have two and both are shluchim. So this Brayse here is clearly saying that that's when the machlokes is. So it's a raya to the second version, not like the first version. Again, the first version said that they're not both shluchim, and the second version is saying that they are both shluchim, and still there's an argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan whether you have to testify b'fanei nichtav b'fanei nechtam.